Hello and welcome to Inside Novaquark, episode 5, the podcast about all things Dual Universe and the people who craft it. I'm Nomad, community manager, and your host today. This episode has been recorded on both sides of the Atlantic at the same time. With various people sick at the office, we had to get creative on how to proceed to record this episode. It's the magic of editing. I wish NQ Sesh a quick recovery. It was his turn to lose his voice this time. Anyway, we didn't want to be too long to answer to the questions from the community, so here we go. On this show today, you'll hear JC, founder, CEO, and creative director, and Entropy, game designer. We'll answer what we identified as the most recurring and pressing questions touching a broad variety of topics. Gameplay, of course, with building, mining, piloting, industry and PvP, but also the client and server performances, the voxel tech, the server tech, etc. You got it? We're going to cover a lot of things again today, so sit down, relax, grab a snack and a cup of something you like to drink. Let's go. Hi, JC.
Hi.
Hi, Entropy.
Hey guys, how's it going?
So we're here today to answer to many questions from the community, and we wanted to start with client-server performances. About the lag, the pending operations, etc. So about the server tech, first one, why are there so many pending operations, and why is it so laggy? JC.
Okay, so pending operations is one aspect of the bugs we are currently ironing out. Why is it so? It's because we are constantly changing parts of the server tech. So once we do that, usually what happens is that there is a moment where there are some regression, we have to fix something. So this is what we're doing at the moment. There's nothing that we see that is in any way alarming. That would be like something that we're puzzled, that we don't know what to do about. So this is part of the things we are currently fixing, or that we are planning to fix in the short term. So yes, we are perfectly aware of that. There's nothing really worrying. But it's part of the final touches we put to the server tech so that it's going to work. Our clear deadline for smoothing all these issues is the NDA lift.
Right. So I guess the next question is already kind of answered. Are the optimizations yet to come, or do we need to buy a new gaming rig to play in the future?
No. I mean, we still aim at let's say a middle range gaming rig, not the entry level, probably not the cheapest one you can get. Definitely not a desktop setup or something like that. But it wouldn't make a lot of sense from a business perspective to release a game that works only with the super expensive latest rig. So that's not what we are going to do. So no need to buy anything new. And the optimizations are going to come both on the client and on the server tech. And they will, we will constantly optimize, of course, but there will be, we hope there will be a significant boost by the time of the NDA.
Okay, so the game. Next question: the game is growing almost every day. How is it with the server tech? Do we get NQ related events so we can stress test the server? Why does NQ not enforce mass tests to test that the server tech, just test it for good?
Yeah, well, we definitely are running tests already, and every time people log in during the test sessions, these are test sessions. We are going to increase those tests and put more pressure through bots and also via the players, but also we might also hire some company to help us, to stress by actual connections and so on. But definitely this is something, we are it's going to cost. So we are going to do this once we are reasonably happy with the stabilization of the current, modifications that we're talking about. So there are still pieces of the technology that we update, that we change. So until this is stabilized, there's no reason to really start expensive, massive tests, but they will come, obviously, yes.
Yeah, and maybe it's worth also mentioning that we hired a dedicated person to work on that recently, and that it's really something we are investing in for the future, to make sure that things are a bit more ironed.
Yes, there's someone who is dedicated to actually develop all the technology for powerful bot testing. It's very difficult to create a bot that is, really, as best as possible, reproducing the behavior of a normal player with all
Yes.
this complexity, variation. And there's also, you need to simulate things like the imperfection of the line. You have to create some, fake packet loss and things like that so that you can really test. This is actually a very, very serious piece of technology in itself. And there's someone now who is working just on that.
Yeah, right. And so next question is more about voxels and building. Why so many voxel loading problems? Can we be sure that fixing those issues will not invalidate a wide number of blueprints, as it already happened in the past?
Okay, so the voxel loading problems are also part of the things that will get, we hope, massive improvements. There's a completely different approach on the tech side for what happens, when you see things from a certain distance, which currently is kind of, providing this sort of melted appearance where you lose all the details. So we have things in the making at the moment that could solve that and improve also in the same way could improve the performance. So all this is going to come. What I want to stress is that your constructs and therefore the blueprints you make are extremely invariable. So even if we have to change something in the way things are encoded, the strong guarantee is that we are going to provide we are going to run, some upgrade scripts on our side so that you can preserve what you've done. There might be minor glitches because some things, render a bit differently. Okay, that's kind of acceptable. You might have to iron out a few things, but definitely we want to make sure that everything, all these incredible constructs that have been built already, they are here to stay. We don't expect people just to start from scratch and rebuild everything. So this is very, very important. So, wiping out the blueprints and, starting from zero is not an option. It's not going to happen. We're going to make everything we can to convert whatever has to be converted. And the voxel tech in itself getting more and more stable, there should be less and less need to change anything anyway. What I'm talking about, about the long distance is the level of detail management. It has nothing to do with the way the voxels are encoded, so nothing to do with the blueprint. It has to do with the rendering. So these are different problems.
Yeah, it's kind of tricky for us because what maybe we need to explain to our players that we have to manage. There is a trade-off between the time they invested in the alpha tests and the amazing stuff they create, and that makes the value of Dual Universe in a way, and our own need of testing and refining stuff and all the operations we need to perform on the development perspective. So we always try to find a middle ground, and that's not an easy task. But like you said, we have transition scripts and everything, so we will try to be as performant as possible to maintain what players have already created and to also fit our development needs for the future. It's a tricky exercise.
Yeah.
Okay, next section of questions is more gameplay related and more building related specifically. About voxel and building, can we expect a voxel library to be available through game mechanics, or will we have to keep improvising entropy?
So the voxel library is a feature that we like, and we would like to have it. I think the stage that we're out at today in development, as we go into Alpha 3 and then a little bit later into Beta, we have to be focused on finalizing sort of these big overarching pillars to put in all the big stuff into the game and get the game up to a level of polish that we need to be able to be as successful as we can be. And then as we sort of start finishing out those big tasks, we can sort of start looking at features like this. But this is something that we like. It's on our radar, and hopefully we can have it maybe as soon as beta, but no promises.
Yeah, and I might add also that there's a simpler version of this voxel library. We call it voxel elements in a sense. You see the correspondence with the actual elements that we have in the game now. It would be just to have a list that you give names to those things, and you just pick them by name. That is probably the first thing we'll be able to do at some point. And then, of course, there's the feature we all hope and expect to have, where you have a pre-visualization of the voxel element in the UI. You can actually see them. You could trade them. You could share them with your organization, etc., etc. So this feature can get pretty complicated if you want to really push it where it should be. So, but the easy version should not be such a big deal to develop, and we'll see when we can do it. I can't guarantee any release date for that, but yeah, it's definitely something we want. We understand that it's fundamental so that you can actually build faster and share your expertise with other people and so on. And yeah.
Okay, next one, still voxel related. Are there any plans to add a voxel Vertex editor in order to directly manipulate voxels? If so, when? Entropy.
Yeah, so this is actually something that's a little bit easier to do. It's something that we can almost already do internally. So to me, this is something that if, as soon as maybe after Alpha 3 or once we have a little bit of time and we're a bit less pressed for, finishing up the release, I think this is something that we could probably do quite quickly. We like the idea, we like the feature, and I think we could do it, yeah.
Okay, cool. Next one, it's a bit long, so bear with us. When will we be available to link, connect, or merge cores so that they act as one build? Will we ever have a Snap2 type of core alignment system in place for all cores so building cities is easier? Or Novaquark in the process of creating a way to link cores together specifically, perhaps using the link tool, which will then create a mega construct idea to manage over both core ideas so that elements can interact between them. Also, are there any tools being designed to help place and link cores together more effectively, such as a mega construct tool? Entropy.
Yeah, so there's two parts to this question, so I'm going to take them one at a time.
Yeah.
For anything regarding mega core units, linking core units, or merging core units, right now the answer is no. A lot of our infrastructure and a lot of our gameplay systems sort of rely on the core unit. It's sort of one of the important things that we base a lot of our systems on, and it's sort of this big universal truth that's kind of hard to break. That doesn't mean that we can never sort of look at these sorts of systems where you can merge these core units, but as of right now, this is not a plan that we have. The second part, however, in regards to alignment and being able to have an easier time to put various core units, next to each other and having the voxel grids be aligned to each other, that is something that's important. That is something that we want to look into, and we want to make sure that alignment and building cities, as you said, and putting core units between them and having them be level on the same voxel grid. That's important, and that's something that we want to look at and do fairly rapidly.
Yeah, maybe a word of explanation on the tech reasons why you could not build arbitrarily big stuff, especially for dynamic constructs. In fact, the problem is the physics that you need to sort of, if you want to have, when I say physics, I mean collisions. If you want to have something precise that makes sense, you need to instantiate things that are far away when it's really, really big. And that's exactly what we don't want to do. That's where we want to actually reduce the level of details and manage the load based on that. So there's a contradiction between optimization and the fact that you have huge things that could move. That's one limit. The other limit, for example, on the elements you could reach, and why you cannot actually chain 20 constructs and be able to talk to any elements over those 20 constructs, is that, again, here we are going to phase out elements that are too far away. So there are some limits to how far you could actually reach, or you would have to abandon this optimization and start to have all the elements available, or to be able to designate those that you want to be able to see from afar, etc., etc. It's a complicated question that is, at the end of the day, it's related to how we can load balance everything and how we can make things scale. So there will be less constraints on the sheer size of static constructs in terms of the size, the visual size they have, but being able to reach an element that is potentially 1 kilometer away, that raises all sorts of issues that I just mentioned. So these are the reasons why things are not so easy to do, and why we have to put some limits at some point. Doesn't mean we cannot overcome those limits in the future, but this enters into the realm of almost like R&D. Definitely, that's not the focus we have at the moment.
Yeah, indeed. Okay, next question. Are we getting some form of construct-to-construct attachment, like with connectors, and that a transfer unit is able to empty or fill the ship? JC.
Okay, so I'm not going to talk about construct attachment in the sense of what I just said before. So it's covered by what we just said before, but definitely docking units should be a thing. I don't know when they're going to be done, but they are in fact relatively easy to do because they could be in the first implementation, they could be done on the client side only. It's just a way to move your ship. And so it could be something that comes, and that's something we want, so that you have a sort of a formal way to dock yourself to a station, and the station has a formal way to declare some parking areas that are available, and your ship can actually scan for available areas that are not overlapping and just dock there. So this is something that would make easier to dock and dock and go from station to station, which is something you do a lot, I think, when the game will be launched fully. So this is the thing we're looking at. And about the fact that you can empty or fill a ship, or at least a fuel tank, this is also something that we will need at some point, I think, because if you have a huge, let's say, fuel station in space and you have like tens of ships around, it would be probably a little bit boring to go transport all the fuel in and out physically, I mean, with your inventory or with a transport ship or something. So it would probably be a good idea at some point that you can remotely transfer with a short distance, I mean, with some limits and so on. But this is not, I mean, it's not even at the stage of game design. So we are not actually planning that in the short term. But it's definitely an interesting idea that we're going to look into at some point to streamline,
we're talking
and make
about
it easier
it,
to have those huge fuel stations in space so that can be used by thousands of people in a day, and without cluttering the line, basically, by having players needing like 30 minutes to just do the basic things of refueling.
Right. Next question. Have you considered only having one core type? It would make things simpler and it would not artificially restrict players' choices. If they want it to be static, then they leave it on one spot or on the planet or in space. If they want it to be mobile, they put engines on it. Fuel, mass, power, etc. are all natural restrictions that will balance these player choices. Entropy?
So it's interesting that you talk about these restrictions. I think there's a balance to be had between all the freedom that we give to players, and I think for the most part we do a pretty good job of giving the players a lot of freedom with a lot of what they can do. But sometimes we just need a little bit of control to be able to balance out certain things. And so one of the main reasons from the gameplay side that we have multiple core units is that it allows us to play a little bit with those restrictions and apply a couple rules when we need them. This isn't something that we're interested in spamming. We don't want to overly restrict everything, and it's not our interest. It's not the direction that we go in. But when we need to, and when we need it for balance reasons, or when we need it to prevent something from fundamentally breaking the game, whether it be from a balance perspective or from an overarching mechanics perspective, then we have those that access to be able to put in those rules, and it allows us to do some cool stuff too, right? So maybe a simple example off the top of my head, right? But let's talk about storage, right? Let's say that, for example, we wanted to make it easy to store things on a static construct, but not on a dynamic construct. So a part of that, of course, is handled by the mass and the fact that you have to move things around, that you have to have the required engines and all that. And all that is true. But sometimes in certain situations, that's not going to be enough. And maybe players are going to be complaining about, oh, we need more storage on our statics. Like, we have so much stuff where, as the game grows bigger, as organizations grows bigger, we're going to need maybe more storage. And so something that we could do is have static only containers that have a lot more volume. And that would allow us to sort of fix those sorts of issues. Now, that particular example may or may not apply today, but that's the sort of things, especially as we go into PvP, as we go into construct versus construct combat and territory control and all that sort of stuff. It gives us paths when we need it to be able to tweak certain things and put in some rules so that everything sort of just works.
Yeah, and we can also bounce to what I just said before about the difference between dynamic and static. It's highly possible that we are able to extend the size of the max core unit in static because it doesn't move, and we won't have won't have that much freedom for the dynamic because of the physics and collision and so on. So there are different things, in fact, and from a gameplay or a tech perspective, it's important that we can distinguish them.
Okay, moving on. Will you fix the building zone for core units missing one voxel on 3 sides? Entropy.
Yeah, so this is actually interesting. I had to dig deep a little bit for this one and talk to the Voxel guys and some of the client guys. This is not so. I'll be clear straight up. There's a reason why that voxel is missing. It's not we didn't just forget it. There's a whole bunch of technical reasons for why that voxel is missing, and they seem to be legitimate reasons, especially for performance. I couldn't explain it to you because it's sort of deep in the voxel tech, and I, to be honest, don't quite fully understand it, but there is a reason. I did investigate, however, and it depends on the priority of sort of what the actual problem is. If the priority is symmetry, it would actually be very easy to remove another voxel on the other side. So, for example, if you take your excess core unit and you go and you extend either side on the same axis from the core, you have 31 on one direction and 30 on the other direction, right? What we could do is have it 30 on each. What we can't do easily is have it 31 on each side. That's the hard part. But what we could do is, restrict all the core size, down to one voxel and have it be symmetry. So, depending on what the actual problem is with this issue, if the main problem is the symmetry aspect, this is something that we can actually fix by just removing one voxel, column on every side, and that would fix it. But extending it, unfortunately, is something that's a lot harder and maybe impossible, depending on how far we can push the performance for this particular issue.
Okay, next question. It's a combo question. The place voxel tool should place clean shapes. Currently, it doesn't do what is often expected to. And second question in one, when copying and pasting voxels, they don't seem to save the shapes consistently. And most of the time, what is pasted isn't the same as what was copied. It's usually faster to just do the job twice than to try to fix what gets distorted with a copy-paste operation. Is there anything planned to tackle this issue, Entropy?
Yeah, so voxel issues are known to us, obviously, but we don't necessarily know every single one. I'm going to use this moment sort of as a call out. If you're running into the same voxel issue over and over again and you have very specific repro steps, it would actually be great if you guys communicated that to us. Voxel issues in terms of the clipping and the melting and all these sorts of like little issues that happen when you copy paste, these are notoriously hard to track and reproduce. We're always on the hunt to sort of fix voxel issues, and we fix voxel issues all the time, but it is a complex system, and one of the hardest parts is to reproduce them. So if you have really good repro rates for very specific issues, then once we have the repro rate, those issues are actually usually quite easy to fix. The hardest part for us is usually to find the issues and be able to repro them on our side. And a lot of the time, when we see screenshots and we see videos of players, we're like, okay, well, we see that there's an issue, and of course. And then we go back and we try to reproduce it, and it's like, okay, well, now it's not happening. So we're always like, okay, what did this player do? How did he end up in this situation? Like, what combination of tools and copy paste and blah, blah, blah did he use to get to this moment? And if we had that information, I think it would actually be a lot faster for us to fix those issues. So we're always trying to fix them. And if you have good repro rates, please tell us.
Yeah, and they never hesitate to, during or after an alpha test session, to send to support@novaquark.com your bug reports and that kind of issues we just described. We investigate, and as JC said during the part one of this podcast, it's not forgotten. We have an organization. We create tickets internally to work on these issues and hopefully to fix them. Some are easier than others, but it's never falling into limbo, and we investigate and definitely work on that. Next question, and I know it's kind of one of the dreams of our lead game designer at Novaquark. Will we have some form of road building tools, Entropy?
So unfortunately, right now there's no real plan for having road building tools. What we have right now is the flatten tool. But if I'm being honest, I am interested in knowing what functionality you guys would be looking for. Because when I read road building tool, there's a lot of things that come to mind, and I'm not 100% sure exactly what it is that you guys mean. Is it just like the flatten tool, but on a larger scale? Does it imply a construct? What exactly does that mean? So right now, there's no plans for some sort of road building tool. But depending on what the functionalities that you guys are looking for, maybe we can actually do something that's quite cheap and cool for you guys if we know what you guys want.
I think there's a particular version of this tool that could be flattening on a larger scale maybe, and also deploying some particular materials instead of the ground. That would be cool. Mostly aesthetics, I would say, because you can fly very well already on anything flattened. But I mean, I understand it would be cool to see the road. That would be really cool.
Yeah, I think something that we probably could do, which wouldn't be super hard. I would have to double check. I don't want to make any promises, but is have to have some sort of flatten tool, which would also replace the texture
Yeah,
of the ground.
exactly.
So if you for example, if you selected, some sort of stone ground that you had digged up from somewhere else, and you had a whole bunch of stone, you could probably flatten and then also replace that top level of whatever, maybe
Yep.
it's dirt or grass with stone. That's probably something that we could look into, and it wouldn't be too crazy.
Okay, next question is about mining. Is there any easy way to finish off the last leader of an already mined node in the making, like highlighting the last bit or any other idea that fits? Are you going to make the ore scanner sensitivity adjustable? The last bits of ore are hard to find, and sometimes it would be preferred if the scanner could ignore them. Entropy.
Yeah, so unfortunately, I don't have a great answer for this. This particular issue has been a little bit of a crusade of mine ever since we sort of did the first version of mining, which I was involved in. There is no easy way to clean up that last little bit of voxel material that you just can't find. I mean, I've mined a lot, and I know exactly what it is you're talking about, and you're just frustratingly looking around with your scanner, your detector, trying to find that last little node. And it can sometimes takes a few minutes, and I understand the frustration. I've experienced it. This is, I've actually spent some times with the Voxel guys, and we've done some development to try to fix this issue. And every time we've sort of fallen short. It's sort of one of those, long-term issues that I've been trying to fix for a long time. I'm going to keep working at it, keep looking into it, but right now there's no Jesus solution for this one. So hopefully at some point we'll have some sort of refactor where we can find a solution, but right now there's nothing.
Okay, next one is about water. Are you going to fix the underwater lighting issues? When? Will we see water areas instead of an overall water layer? So when we mine inland, we will not encounter water unless we mine into a water pool. And will water then be able to be manipulated and move just as if you broke a dam or wanted to dry out an area? JC.
Yeah, this is actually an old question, and it's coming regularly. Water is actually a very tricky subject, and so mostly because of the scale of what we're doing, because everything is editable. There's Minecraft that does it pretty well, but on a relatively small scale. It's just the water around you, and it's actually a cellular automaton that is propagating the water. It's nicely done. It doesn't really translate to a world of the size of the universe. So you could imagine a giant pool of water suspended in the air, and you just break or destroy the thing underneath, and then suddenly all this mass of water is falling. You can see that it could be potentially unbounded in terms of computation to do that. It's very hard to actually do it with a multi-scale approach, where you could just sort of doing a high level of detail simulation of the flow, and then go into details. This is extremely complicated. Definitely in the realm of R&D, definitely something we will probably try to address at some point. But right now we just decided not to spend time on that. So the water we have today is clearly a placeholder. It's just a sphere of water, so it makes the ocean appear. That's about it. Maybe we could actually dig that sphere, have the water go deeper on the parts that are considered land, so that you don't encounter water when you dig, or at least it would happen way deeper. These are perhaps things we could look into, but definitely, the full-fledged water voxels that would be transparent and that you can actually mine. So with, of course, whatever you mine is going to be refilled automatically because water is flowing. These are complicated issues, and we just want to focus the team that is actually capable of doing that to other things that are more problematic, that are more important to do in the short term. But I just want to say it's a big topic. So unfortunately, don't expect miracles going on the water side until probably post-release. That's for sure. So, but yeah, that would be cool, and it's something a little bit disappointing in the game at the moment. But yeah, we are going also to try to work on the waves, so that they go in the right direction, and a little bit more immersive, rendering of the shore. But yeah, that's probably as far as it will go for the moment.
Yeah, we have many stuff to work on, definitely. So next question, when will you implement a salvaging feature, and what will it do? Entropy.
Yeah, so actually, this is something that we haven't spoken about a lot, but a first version of what we're calling salvaging will actually going to be coming in Alpha 3. For us, salvaging is going to be an extension of ownership. With ownership and the fact that you can trade constructs and all that stuff, there's going to be a way that you can actually lose ownership of a construct, and a construct can be without owner. So, for example, this could happen if you abandon it, or it could happen if in a PvP fight, for example, a construct could become without owner. And then what can happen is that those constructs still exist in the in the 3D world, but any player that finds them can just go up to them, and since they have no owner, there's no rights and there's no restrictions. And so players who find these abandoned constructs can just go ahead and salvage them. So you can start opening the containers, pulling off the voxels, or taking everything and going home. So this is something that we'd like to expand on further, but for us, this is sort of a first step for salvaging, is having these abandoned constructs that sort of litter the world through game mechanics, and then players can just go around and find these constructs and loot them and scrap them and do whatever they want.
And you'll be able to see them in the radar that they are actually not owned. So it's a way to identify those potential salvageable constructs. And then, of course, the final gameplay we could have is that you have a full-fledged gameplay to locate those things, even if they are not in your radar, and lots of things that could be very interesting to add in a later stage.
Okay, so let's talk about piloting a little bit now. Is the 29,999 speed cap because of server limitations, or was it chosen for balance reasons first?
So it's a little bit of both, really. From the gameplay point of view, the max speed is a parameter that we control to define a whole bunch of interactions in the game. So after we sort of put down the planets and we sort of calculated how long it took to go from various planets, to go from various points to various points, you guys may remember we started at 20,000 and then we pumped it up to 30,000 because we thought it was a little bit slow. So this is something that we control. We think that 30,000 for now is okay, but this is something that we can adjust in the future if we need to. From a more technical standpoint, we do have to be careful with how high we go with the speed. If you've played today and you've gone at very high speeds with other players next to you, specifically with other constructs next to you, and you multiple constructs next to each other, you can tell that sometimes it gets a little bit weird, and that's pretty much directly linked to the speed, because we are going at very, very high speeds. There are not a lot of games that actually allow you to go that fast, for real in the game world. So we do have to be very careful about how high we make the speed go, because if we make it go too high, we're going to expose a lot of these issues that happen at high speeds, and we need to be careful there.
Next question, we are going to talk about industry. When will you allow industry on dynamic cores? A lot of players really want this feature because it is important to the nomadics lifestyle. It was advertised as a possible playstyle early in the game's development. Entropy.
Yeah, so I want to be really careful about how I answer this question. I know this is kind of a big topic. I think there's two ways that I can approach this way. So I'll start with the first one. The first one is that we need to be careful with exactly this sort of actually goes back a little bit to my earlier question on the differences between the core units. This is one of those restrictions that we put in because we were a little bit afraid of the consequences. As we sort of go into Alpha 3, into beta, and then into release, as we start putting in a lot of these big systems that for now we don't have that much information about. So when we're talking about combat, when we're talking about territory warfare, when we're talking about all these sorts of things that we don't have very much information about, we just have to be careful with like these really big, powerful things that we put into the game. Industry on dynamic constructs is a really, really powerful thing. It's no joke. We are very afraid of sort of having these like mega factories that can sit on these anti-gravity devices that can move around from planet to planet, from territory to territory, just suck up all the resources without, be able to stay in the safe spaces when they need to and then move out when they need to. To me, that is something that is extremely powerful, and maybe it's okay, and maybe eventually it can be in the game, but it's something that we want to be careful with, and we want to take our time, and we want to make sure that we know what we're doing, because once we put it in, it's probably going to be quite difficult to take out, or it's going to be something that we have to do, during a big wipe where we actually wipe everything, which may happen one day. So honestly, we're a little bit afraid. We just need to be careful. That doesn't mean that it's never going to happen, but we don't want, that's the sort of stuff that can sort of destroy the ecosystem of the game. And we just need to take it a step at a time. So for now, they're going to stay on static only. And then in the future, once the full scale of the game starts being fleshed out and we start having everything put together, then we can sort of relook at that and say, okay, so now that we have all these things, how does this look now? And then we can reassess.
Yeah, and it's also linked to the PvP system that will be implemented later. It raises a lot of potential questions, so we definitely have to be very careful about it.
And I might also add that it's maybe not a good, reason in the absolute, in terms of game design, but it also gives reasons for you to settle on planets. And it's an open game. People will do whatever they want, but we still, hope, for example, that the game is not entirely happening in space, for example, and that no one is actually living on any planets except, for a short time to get some resources. That could happen, right? It's again, players are doing what they want, and but in the fantasy that we imagine, we hope the planets will be full of large cities that will be industrial complex and so on, that they will have an important part in the game. And so it's always this idea that maybe it's a good idea that some gameplay are in fact tied to the planets. It's not a fantastic way of doing it. The best way would be that it's in your interest to actually do this on the planet. And so that is why, people are doing that. This is the best way to nudge, the evolution of the gameplay towards a particular direction. But as you just said, it's difficult to predict exactly how things are going to evolve. That's actually what is quite interesting in this game.
Yeah.
So we have to be careful. And as I always say, it's always possible to add some salt to the soup. But once it's in there, you cannot really take it out. So we're going to add some salt progressively. See if
we'll test as well. We'll test, we'll see players' feedback. If we kind of find maybe a kind of middle ground that is interesting and brings extra interest to the gameplay and to the systemic gameplay, because we said it many times, but the game is very subtle, and you will have many subsystems interacting with each other. And that's the part of the interest of the game. So we'll have to be careful. We will, of course, rely upon players' feedback about that. Moving on to an interesting question. It's for you, JC. It's about power energy system. When the power systems will be implemented?
I think tomorrow morning or something. I don't remember.
Wow, that's fast.
No,
that's fast.
I just want.
How many developers died in the process? No,
this is something that is very important, because currently there are some free lunch in the game, like the anti-gravity, for example. This is not the way it's meant to be. There should be some kind of management of energy, of electricity, and ways to produce it, and so on. This is what we call the energy gameplay. So when is this going to happen? Definitely not by the beta, because we don't want to release any major features. As I said already, we want to focus on polishing, bug fixing, and so on. It should be done by the release, because it's an important part of the game equilibrium. But we will also make it more like it's not going to be like everything stops working if you don't power it, but it's going to work better if you do. So that will be a way to smooth the transition from the current situation where you don't need any power to a game where it will make sense to have a source of power. It will be a good way to boost your systems, boost your industry, boost whatever, but not in a way that is absolutely that you really have to do. So because otherwise we would break the whole game suddenly. Nothing would fly, nothing would work anymore. We certainly also don't want to have some tedious energy management where you have to plug every single light, every single button, every single door. So you end up wiring tons of things. That would not be really fun. It's just a core basically. So this is just to give you a taste of how it could look like. Definitely you need some way to power things like anti-gravity engines. It doesn't make sense, in fact, that it's so free. So well, I don't know exactly when this is going to be, when we're going to have the bandwidth to actually develop this. It's not very complicated to develop, but there's a lot of assets, there's a lot of game mechanics, lots of things to test, and so on and so on. So it's just a big feature, and we don't want to do that until all the rest is polished, basically.
Yeah. Moving on to important questions about PvP, and more specifically territory protection. First question about PvP and territory protection. Will Sanctuary Moons come back for Alpha 3 and PvP, or any idea on the initial size of the safe zone on Alioth? Is there a chance you will be expanding the Alioth safe zone, or will it stay the original 20-kilometer radius around the Ark ship? When do we get to claim territory and have protection for it? We're talking about TCU there. Will territory control units be released at the same time as PvP? And if not, how will our constructs be defended during Alpha 3 entropy?
Okay, so there's a lot of questions here, so I'm going to take them one at a time.
Big pack of questions.
Try to make sure that I don't miss any here. So first of all, Sanctuary Moons are still on the menu. Sanctuary Moons are still part of the overall design of the game. However, they will not be coming back for Alpha 3. The reason why they're not in Alpha 3 and the reason why we didn't put much time into them for Alpha 3 is because for the CVC release of Alpha 3, we decided to go with the arena that we explained in the other podcast. So
yeah, it's the first version of PvP. Yeah.
Very briefly, I explained it for those of you that missed it, but essentially in the first version of CVC for Alpha 3, PvP will be contained to an area of space outside of normal planets. So it'll be sort of this large area of space where you can fight and nowhere else. So we didn't need for Alpha 3 to spend a lot of time and resources on dealing with all of these safe zone questions. Essentially, we chose to focus on the actual mechanics of CVC and the game feel and the gameplay and all that stuff, and then sort of delay all of the territory control and safeguard questions to a little bit later with territory control and when we release that. The initial safe zone of Alioth. So this is all in discussion, and we're not exactly sure what we're going to do. One of the goals that we have now is that the safe zone of Alioth is actually going to be quite big. The 20-kilometer radius around the Ark ship is what we're calling the Pioneer Zone, and that is, for all intents and purposes, sort of a noob zone. So it's going to be the area in which new players spawn, and they're going to be running around, and it's going to be fairly limited in sort of what you can do. And then the plan is for that there's going to be an extended zone outside of that Pioneer Zone. So as an extension of that zone, still in a radius around the Ark ship, but much, much larger. I'm not going to commit to any distances, but maybe hundreds of kilometers. where you have this safe zone where PvP will be illegal, where your constructs will be safe, where nothing bad can happen to you.
A sanctuary zone, in fact.
Yeah, the sanctuary zone, exactly. And then as part of that, after we sort of do this, we will still be able to add sanctuary moons and have that whole sanctuary moon gameplay when we add those. Where was I? So, well, blah, blah, blah. So the protection questions we are delaying for now, but just for information, the territory control units will be coming back for Alpha 3, so you'll be able to use those in the Alpha 3 to take territory. But for now, they're not going to have any interaction with the combat and CVC systems because we're sort of separating them until we can sort of finish that and release that properly.
Yeah, I just want to stress again the role of the sanctuary zones and sanctuary moons is to provide a safe haven for players so that they can have at least one tile, probably just one tile, in fact, or maybe two, depending on a few exceptions, but a limited number of tiles where they are absolutely safe, where they can leave their stuff and they can go on vacation, they can quit the game for several months and come back. And it's going to be there untouched and safe. This is absolutely necessary. Otherwise, you create a level of stress that is unbearable. I mean, it's just not possible to just go away from the game more than a few days. So we need to have a safe haven, and I think every player will have at least a tile where they can put their stuff and be safe. And of course, those areas will be without valuable things or very limited, and there will be not a place where you can actually start interesting mining operations or things like that. Of course.
Yeah, more about territory protection. More specific question: will you have a way for players to move other players' constructs if they are inside their building zone? For example, someone parks on my construct and I don't want them to. Entropy.
Yeah, so this is actually a much bigger question than what it seems. I think in the end we will need a range of options to be able to deal with these sorts of issues. They are going to arise in many different situations, in many different sorts of, in PvP, outside of PvP, and sort of more like grief side things, and sometimes legitimate. And we're going to need a range of options and protections and things that players can do to sort of protect themselves from this sort of behavior. One of the things that we're exploring initially is just being able to use the move tool on other constructs situationally. So, for example, this is something that you could do maybe if you were on your territory. So if you owned a territory and then there was some random construct on it that you wanted to get rid of, you could just use the move tool and get it the hell out of there. But realistically, this is a much bigger topic. We're going to have to take a look at parenting in general to be able to sort of fill the loop and do this properly. And this is something that's important, something that we probably have to do before beta.
Okay. Still PvP related, but more specifically, about server tech and lag. And it's a big question, so bear with us. A player asks, I have multiple characters and multiple computers, all on the same local network. I run multiple characters at once. One computer is my top monitor and one is on my bottom monitor. And some of what I've been seeing and experiencing is making the release of PvP looks like complete nightmare and train wreck. And I'm worried that lots of people that have not played the game will see here that PvP is implemented for Alpha 3 by the game and freak out on Novaquark for the state of the game and how bad the PvP is working because of these underlying server issues that have been around for a long time. Still continuing on the question, what is often possible to see is you play with character 1, you pick, for example, a container, you move it as far as it is possible with a full range skill, and it takes several seconds to be visible on another monitor. So character number 2 finally starts to see the container moving. You have a visible lag. So the core of the question is how is PvP going to work with things not being where they are and trying to aim when you try to aim them. and to hit them. So the question is about desynchronization. Why is it happening? It's kind of related, I think, to the first question we actually answered to, but it was very important to stress that out. It's very visible for many players. So Entropy, what do you have to say about that?
Yeah, so I think I'm just gonna have to reiterate at least a part of JC's answer from earlier, which is that these sorts of issues, we're aware of them. You know, these are sort of the underlying server and tech issues that we have. As we go into these polishing phase, we have to take the time to make all those issues better. The desync problems, the the little lag problems, the facts that two players don't see the same thing at exactly the same time. We have to work on that, and we have to make sure that the game is as synced as possible and that everything is works as best as possibly can. There's no solution, one word solution for this. Is just small issues that we have to fix on the server, small problems that we have to coordinate correctly and try to get fixed.
I might just add a thing about this is that
Go ahead.
the way the whole design of the game is made is that we don't rely on absolutely super accurate synchronous render of the movements of the character or the movement of the elements and so on. This is something you have to give up when you try to make a single shard game. If you want to have that kind of performance, you need a dedicated server, you need an instance, you need a very small number of players in the same instance, and so on. Unless maybe someone can figure out a way to do it better than we do. But I mean, there's some kind of fundamental sort of limits that are bound to the fact that you have to deal with so many things at the same time. So bottom line is, that's why we actually have a system in PvP which is lock and fire. You lock on something, this is a formal step. You might actually be pointing towards this thing and point to it wherever it is in your particular point of view. It might not be where it really is, but that's enough for you to point at it and trigger the locking system, which is going to formally say, yeah, now it's locked. And then you fire on it, and then it's going to formally fire on it. And no matter where it is, it doesn't really matter because you not aim at it. It's just like in a FPS, your typical Counter-Strike experience. So we just don't deal with that problem because the way the game is designed doesn't actually have to deal with that problem. So it might be a little bit annoying if you have actually the setup this player mentioned, that you see this little lag. But we don't want to cover explicitly this particular use case, in fact, that you need to have accurate, perfect rendering for anyone connected. This is too hard to solve. Again, maybe someone could solve it, but I mean, it's not something we need to if we have the kind of gameplay mechanics we have in mind. So, you get something on one side, the single shard, fully editable world. There are things that you have to abandon on the other side. That is the realistic, synchronous, real-time simulation.
I think just to complete that a little bit, JC's absolutely right in saying that that's the main and fundamental reason, or one of the reasons, why we have lock and fire in PvP. It is so that we don't have to deal with sniping essentially, and having incorrect player positions between the client and the server and all those problems. However, I will just say that I think from a social perspective and from when people are moving around in the world and stuff like that, I think we have to find a little bit of a middle ground where the world is relatively synced and people see themselves more or less where they are. If there's a little bit of a problem, etc., that's okay. And as long as it doesn't interfere with the gameplay, then it's okay. But we just need to be careful and watch out for the big desyncs and the big problems that we have and fix those issues.
But if you have a guy in Australia, not Austria, well, maybe Austria. In Australia, another guy somewhere in Alaska, I think this is far enough. You get the speed of light limit. The speed of light is very high. It's 300,000 kilometers per second. And if you do the math, you'll see that the signal between those two positions on the Earth takes, I think, around 100 milliseconds or something to travel. Roughly, I don't remember, but I mean it's long, and it's an incompressible lag. There's no way we can, go around the limits of physics. So if you want to have a game that allows those two people to play together, which is the point of a single shard server, your game should be working even with that kind of lag, because it will happen. But I agree with you. We are going to try to reduce that lag to the physical limit, basically. So if you happen to be playing with people nearby, it's going to be good. But yeah, you could always be playing with that guy on the other side of the planet, and well, so there's no way we can solve that. Maybe we could use some tiny wormholes and try to bypass the speed of light, but this is definitely in the R&D department and not for release.
Yeah, definitely. Okay, moving on to the next question. If a player decides to build a space station out in the middle of nowhere, would it be possible to track them down and find them, or will they need to be found by chance? What elements or mechanics are Novaquark looking to implement to help with scanning the vast space to look for targets, deep space stations, and hiding dynamic constructs? Entropy.
Yeah, so this is a good lead from the last question actually. One of the main mechanics that we added for construct versus construct combat was the radars. So you already had sort of the old radars that we had previously in the game, and these are sort of like the new and improved ones are a little bit more shiny. They see quite a lot farther. Before we were limited by what your client actually had loaded, and then for these new ones we actually remove that restriction, and it's actually you can actually see very, very far, potentially up to hundreds of kilometers. So this is the first thing that we've put into the game, which is going to allow you to see in space at a much longer distance than you could before. I think the goal right now, once this is in the game and once we have a little bit more info, is to sort of try to find a balance between being hidden and being hard to find. We don't want it to be too easy to hide and have maybe a huge base that no one can ever find, but we also don't want it to be like super trivial that the second you put down a base, everyone in the world knows about it. So we're gonna have the radars, and those allow you to do quite a lot more than what you could do previously. And then we can sort of scale that up or down depending on the information that we get and depending on our intentions in that area.
And it's actually cool to imagine. I mean, we're talking about gameplay mechanics within the game, but there are also things that can happen outside of the game. Like if it's really hard to find a station, why don't you just try to spy and get the information? And that's that's not in the game per se, but it is a way of playing that game that I think is very interesting. Is this particular, where are the headquarters of this organization? No one really knows, but there are people who know. So you should be able to acquire this information by other means, and you can see that this is becoming very valuable. And this is probably an interesting side effect of the fact that it's you cannot just press a button and get the list of everything, but make it a little bit more difficult.
Yeah, we are more talking about kind of metagame here.
Yes.
Next question about traveling, more specifically about fast travel. Can you elaborate more on the intentions of the warp beacons, specifically to inter and intra-system use, JC?
Yes. Okay. So there's a lot of debate on that. But just the fundamentals here is that if you don't have any way to fast travel at all, it means that you have to travel between planets with the current speed limit. And that means several hours of travel between planets. Then one day when we have other systems, if you want to travel between systems, it would be several weeks or days. I don't know. So it doesn't make any sense. You probably need some way to jump to the other system. But within a given system already, moving between planets, if it takes several hours, it will, I think, inevitably partition the game world basically around small populations living inside the area around the given planets, and it will seriously limit the exchanges, in particular the commercial exchanges between these different planets. And one thing that we want to do, and I mentioned it many times, is to reach critical mass. To unleash some ecosystemic effects within the population of gamers, so that they can use the markets and trade and specialize and so on and so on. So this is going in contradiction with that. We don't want to have some bubbles, isolated bubbles of players that sometimes interact with each other because there's a few people who actually agree to spend their Saturday evening traveling from one planet to the other to move some valuable things and so on. So that's why we need some way to have a fast travel. So the precise way by which it's going to be done is still in discussion. The idea is that if you've been somewhere once, it should be possible that you accelerate the fact that you come back again. Hence the fast travel, name. All the things we have in mind, I mean, are not contradictory with the fact that pirates could actually intercept you along this fast travel. We could have, you could create some restriction zone where if you cross those zones, suppose you go super fast, right? There's a sort of a warp drive. Then you could actually have a restriction zone that you can build that will act like a spider, net and trap you inside. This is things that you see in other games. This mechanic is not new. It's something that works pretty well. So, I mean, you could have that. About the worries that, at the arriving point, there could be pirates waiting for you. Yes, of course. And if you own this arriving point, this end point of your warping, probably a good practice would be to defend it so that it has a way to, if there's a bunch of pirates that start to aggregate around it, you have a way to actually fire on them and make them go away. So you have to defend, of course, your infrastructure, unless it is in a safe zone, and we decide to extend that for that purpose. So as I said, it's still in discussion, but I mean, we need to find a way, and it should not prevent pirates to actually do their job, which is basically to intercept, people doing logistics. So this is something that will definitely happen in a way or another, so that we can actually put all the players together really inside the same world.
Okay. Next question, and we already touched the subject a little bit. How do you see docking work in the future? When will mass and cross-section be added to a ship that has another object docked to it?
Okay, so the docking, as I said, is something we're looking into, and definitely then docking or parenting, the fact that you touch another construct and you sit on it. Docking is just a way to make it formal so that it's automatic and you don't have to maneuver to do this. But it's the same thing. And definitely we have to take into account then the mass and the cross-section updates. And I think this is planned. It should not be delayed that much. I mean, it's otherwise it gives rises to all sorts of abuses. We are perfectly aware of that, and it's not a big deal to fix it. So yes, this is going to be polished basically soon.
Okay. The next question is for you too, JC. It's about Lua. Can we expect Lua protection, meaning obfuscation in this context, before or after release? Is it currently not worthwhile to say? It is currently, not worthwhile to sell scripts or ships with scripts in fear of piracy. Protection for Lua script IP. When will blueprint protection systems and Lua codes be implemented?
Okay, so this is a very interesting question. There are ways to obfuscate code in Lua. There's tons of libraries that are doing this. It's also unfortunately quite easy to deobfuscate this code. And at the end of the day, the code that is running, remember, it's running on your machine, in fact, so it's actually going to go in the memory towards the part of the program that is running it, the interpreter of Lua. So if you really want, you could perhaps find a way to intercept this memory. We're trying to prevent that, but you're never 100% sure. So at the end of the day, we can make it more difficult to actually access the code, but it will never be totally safe or foolproof. But definitely something we want to look into. We also would like to introduce the fact that the Lua code is only loaded when you actually run it, so that if you don't have the right to run something, you cannot just try, fail, but still get the Lua code through the network. These kind of things will actually help. But yeah, so this is something we're going to look into. I can't promise anything for release. It's it's in fact a relatively low priority. But personally, I find it very interesting. And but for the moment, it's more like open source philosophy for your Lua code. So when you actually release something, people will be able to see it. And the reasoning is that when you design the ship, there's a tight interplay between the code and the hardware, basically the particular way your ship is designed. So it's not necessarily a good thing to get the Lua code for piloting your ship if you don't have the ship. So at the end of the day, you still want to buy the ship or a blueprint of the ship to get the whole thing together. Doesn't mean, of course, that you cannot reverse engineer everything and steal some design ideas. We are aware of that. So we're going to try to add more, protection like obfuscation at some point. Yes.
Okay. Well, guys, it's the end. Time to wrap up. Thank you very much for your answers. It's been fun, and I hope the community will like what we had to say. And the following questions with the feedback we will get from this podcast and the ones already asked will be answered for most of them with a future AMA that will be posted later. As promised, we're working on it. Thank you very much, and we'll see you next time.
Yeah, see you later.
Thanks.
Thank you so much for listening. Your feedback about this 5th episode would be much appreciated. Depending on the platform you're listening to us, you can use the rating system at your disposal. Please rate us 5 stars if you liked it, give us a thumbs up or down, leave a comment, anything to help us improving this show. You can share it with your friends too. Don't forget, you can reach out to us via Discord. It's discord.gg/dualuniverse, our forums, and of course on Facebook, Twitter, and Instagram. To be sure to not miss anything DU related, we encourage you to like us on social media, of course, and to subscribe to our YouTube channel and newsletter. The links should be in the description of the show, depending on the platform you're using to listen to us. If you didn't back Dual Universe yet and you consider to do so now, thank you very much. We rely exclusively on crowdfunding and private money, and your support means everything to ship our crazy project. More about that at dualthegame.com/pledge. Thanks again for your time, take care, and we'll see you next time.